Thank you.
Okay, so let me just start here. I always forget how to present on this one. Here we go. Present. Okay. So I'm just titling this training, The Basics of Affordable Housing and Homelessness, National and Local Perspectives, to try to give you all an idea, again, high level of kind of the housing and homelessness landscape. A little bit about my organization. I've been here for 8 years. We are a coalition that was started in 2000 by a number of nonprofit partners coming together and saying we needed to have an umbrella organization working on ending homelessness in our community. And so those nonprofits joined together with government entities like the health department and others within Washtenaw County, and said, they're providing services or housing to people who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, and we want to work together. So our mission is to end homelessness. That's what we are here to do every day. Okay, and then today I'm just going to talk a little bit about federal stuff, local stuff, how the federal stuff kind of plays into the state and local stuff, and then homelessness and housing insecurity here in the county in Washtenaw. So I wanted to start kind of high level. What is affordable housing? Housing that is generally 30% of a household's gross annual income is determined as being affordable. If you're looking at housing costs as well as transportation costs, we're looking at about 45% of someone's gross annual income. So that's kind of the measure at which we're looking at. If you're exceeding the 30%, it's considered that you're cost burdened. And in Washtenaw County, we have over 50% of renters exceeding 30% of their income towards rent.
I found this on the web.
Oh, sorry, my watch. In terms of federal context, we spend a lot more money at the federal level on home ownership than we do on low income, middle income rental. So this is just a chart for you from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities that shows kind of how we as a society are really looking at home ownership versus rental housing. There's a deficit of over 7 million units of affordable housing in our community or in our nation, and over 500,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night in the country. And approximately 1 in 4 eligible low-income households receives any type of federal housing assistance. This means it's not like an entitlement like SNAP benefits or Medicaid. Housing is not considered in the same breath as that. And so even though you may be eligible for this type of housing, that's affordable, most people don't get it. Kind of looking at it another way, 3 out of 4 low-income, renters do not receive any federal rental assistance. Those who are unassisted, it's over 17 million at-risk renter households eligible but don't receive it. 63% are households that have children or are headed by a person who is elderly or has disabilities. This is just a snapshot from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and it shows that nationally there are enough affordable and available rental units for households only when the households are at least 100% of the area median income. And in a little bit, I'll talk to you about what that looks like in Washtenaw County. But basically, when you see kind of another way of saying it is that there is not enough affordable and available rental housing for households earning less than 100% of area median income. So
Amanda,
this shows.
Can you say what the area median income, what that means?
Yes, so it's the sort of the average income across a metropolitan area. HUD defines the area median income based on kind of what they call metropolitan service areas, MSAs. And so in Washtenaw County, that's kind of considered the Ann Arbor MSA. And so we're grouped together. And so it's kind of what is the average income across all households in our county or in another municipality. So a little bit about subsidized versus unsubsidized housing. One second. So affordable housing can actually be either subsidized or not subsidized. Millions of low income and moderate income households live in households that are not subsidized by government, but it is affordable to them. Dedicated affordable housing units, on the other hand, are really essential for ensuring affordability in places where market rents are rising rapidly. And I would say Washtenaw County is one of those markets. Constructing new affordable housing to low-income households is really not financially feasible without government subsidy, because the rent or the home prices that low-income households can afford are really just too low to support the costs of construction and operating new development. But when developers build new housing for middle or lower income households, the owners of older existing units often find that they need to lower their rents, as there's kind of newer, pricier options out there in the market. And so if they're lowering those rents, then those may become more affordable over time. And there are really two main types of subsidized affordable housing. So I'm diving more into the some way subsidized housing. So there's site-based subsidized housing where the subsidy is attached to the rental unit. This is also often referred to as project-based housing. And in the next couple of slides, I'll share a little bit about what that looks like. And then there's tenant-based subsidized housing where the subsidy is really assigned to the tenant, who has to use that voucher or subsidy in the private landlord setting and has to work with and find a landlord that's willing and able to help them use that voucher in their home. So a little bit diving more deeply into site-based. On the right-hand side, I put examples from Washtenaw County that you might be familiar with of site-based subsidized housing. They can be privately owned, like for-profit or nonprofit developers, or they can be owned by a local housing commission or a public housing authority, is what the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development defines them as. So site-based is often created through HUD and or IRS programs. One of the biggest is called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. That is an IRS program that really is 80 to 85% of a development's costs come from the low income housing tax credit process. Sycamore Meadows up here in Ypsi and Superior Township, Hamilton Crossing. Sycamore Meadows is run by a private owner. Hamilton Crossing is run by a public owner, the Ypsi Housing Commission. Pauline Apartments on the kind of lower right-hand side here is run by a private nonprofit, Avalon Housing. And then this is Miller Manor, and that is owned by the other public housing authority in our county, Ann Arbor Housing Commission. So this is just kind of 4 examples of the types of site-based housing that you might see. And then I wanted to kind of go even deeper there. Site-based can also be for a specific population. And so some site-based housing is for people who are older adults, those who are disabled, and or those who are homeless households. And so just 2 examples of site-based locations here in our county would be Carpenter Place and then Laurie Terrace. So diving into then kind of the opposite would be tenant-based subsidized housing, where the subsidy or the voucher is assigned to the tenant, who then has to work with the landlord or find the landlord. And I saw this infographic that I thought was really helpful in kind of understanding the different players. There's essentially kind of 3 players in the tenant-based subsidy world. And that's 1, the tenant. They find the unit, they follow the lease terms, they communicate with the housing authority, they hosts re-inspections of the unit every year. The landlord is the one that's leasing the unit to a tenant. They enforce the lease terms, they receive rental assistance payments, they maintain the property, and they update paperwork as needed. And then the housing authority is the authority that is reviewing rents, approving leases, inspecting the units, signs contracts with the owner. It goes without saying, they're also the one holding the wait list for vouchers. So in Washtenaw County, typically someone might have a voucher from a number of different housing authorities. One would be the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, so the state's housing authority, and they use private companies. Two are in Washtenaw County that are called CMA and RPI. And they're the housing agents that are kind of doing the lease up of those programs and maintaining those voucher lists and really helping the tenant and the landlord work together to get, the tenant into housing. Sometimes because it's a private entity doing that, there are some barriers with availability and response and whatnot by those MSHDA housing agents. And so we try to be on top of that and understand kind of who's been pulled for a voucher, who might be in the process of getting recertified, all of those kind of things. Other examples are Ann Arbor Housing Commission is the other kind of larger housing authority that has, I think, over 1,300 vouchers in Washtenaw County. They also can lease up their vouchers in Monroe County. And then we have a very small subset of vouchers that are called emergency housing vouchers that Plymouth Housing Commission has given in partnership to Washtenaw County to lease up some folks with a Plymouth voucher. So those are kind of the three kind of bigger entities, I would say, that are leasing up vouchers. The biggest thing to note is that a voucher tenant can move with the voucher to another unit. It has to be approved, it has to find a landlord. That's often really hard in our market, but that's kind of the difference. The voucher goes with me as the tenant versus in a project-based setting, there is no affordability guaranteed long-term if I am to move. So local housing context that I wanted to share with you all is really just around two key terms that in the housing world we talk about a lot. One is the area median income, which I kind of talked a little bit about before, and the other is fair market rent. So fair market rent is used by HUD to indicate the amount of money a property would rent or lease for within a certain geographical boundary. Our fair market rents are calculated in Washtenaw County across the whole county. So while it might be really expensive to rent in Ann Arbor and less expensive to rent in Manchester, for example, the fair market rent is average of all of the rents in the county. And this chart right here shows you the fiscal year 2022 fair market rents for our county. So we don't have many efficiencies or studios, but at a 1-bedroom is $1,048 fair market rent. A 4-bedroom is $1,816. The area median income for Washtenaw County has really risen over, my time here at Washtenaw Housing Alliance. Right now it's $82,000 per person for one person household. And then just here, I put in for you a kind of, what at 100%, that's 82, but at 80%, it would be 62,000. At 60% of area median income, it's 49,000. And then at 30%, it's 24,750. So those are kind of the different levels of median income that we're looking at often. And the reasons I chose 60 and 30 in particular are because a lot of HUD programs are looking at those area median incomes to determine eligibility for a program. And yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
I just want to say that just so everybody's clear, that fair market rent calculation is an average of the whole county. So if you're looking at that and saying that seems high or that seems low, recognize that's including high-end apartments in Ann Arbor and low-end apartments in Ann Arbor, high-end apartments in Ypsi and low-end apartments in Ypsi.
Yes. That's true. Yeah. Thank you, Ruth. And if you have a voucher, like a tenant-based voucher, these are the rents that you would have. You know, if I'm a one-person household and I want to rent an efficiency or a one-bedroom, this is basically the maximum amount that I can, you know, find a rental unit for is like 1,048. So this is why you probably often see that vouchers are often not utilized in the city of Ann Arbor, because rents can go as high as $1,500 for a one bedroom. Well, then a voucher really is not able to be used in places like that. I'm going to kind of just quickly go over this, but the county Office of Community and Economic Development did a study in 2015 with a Virginia-based consultant. The study is called the Housing Affordability and Economic Equity Analysis. It's got a lot of detailed data about our housing market. And quite frankly, since it's 2015 and a little bit before that data, it probably needs to be updated, as much as I think OCED doesn't probably want to do that right now, but just because the markets really have started to change a lot. But essentially what the study found was that we had sort of this fundamentally strong market in the Ann Arbor, Pittsfield, or Ann Arbor and Pittsfield areas, and this fundamentally like weaker or distressed housing market in Ypsi and Ypsi Township. And so we also, at the same time that this study was coming out, we had additional studies that were showing how segregated the Washtenaw County community is, based on socioeconomic status. And the recommendation from the 2015 report is here, that we needed to significantly expand the supply of affordable housing within Ann Arbor and Pittsfield by over 3,000 units of affordable housing in the next 20 years. And so that study has a number of different kind of objectives and goals, and it talks a lot about the growth, how to grow the supply of affordable housing. We're implementing a lot of the recommendations from that program or that study. I would say one of the biggest ones that we've been able to implement is looking at properties that the city of Ann Arbor owns that are underutilized, like parking lots in the downtown area. And then also in 2020, our community in Ann Arbor approved an affordable housing tax proposal. And so for 20 years, there's an extra tax in Ann Arbor to build more affordable housing to the tune of 1,500 units of new affordable housing. And so those are two of the biggest things that we've done. A lot of communities have looked at smaller changes, incremental changes, like being able to provide accessory dwelling units or granny flats on properties, looking at changing zoning. We're hoping that other communities will look at what kind of municipal owned land that they might be able to build affordable housing on, really trying to get to that 3,000 plus goal that's in the 2015 plan. And then one thing that I'm just going to share is that we've actually gone backwards in the inventory of affordable housing, because right after that 2015 study was released, we started realizing that there were tax credit site-based subsidized housing that was being lost to affordability. They were privately owned affordable housing developments. Once they reached the state's mandated affordability periods per the kind of funding that they were built with, a lot of those developers and owners decided to get out of the affordable housing business and make those apartments go market rate. And so this is just a count. Was last updated in 2021. So I know OCED is working on updating it even more, but last count, we had lost nearly 1,000 units of a committed affordable housing. Properties included like Wood Chase, which I think is technically in Scioto Township, Cross Street Village in the city of Ypsilanti, a number of different developments that we lost significant amount of units from. So I wanted to just share with you all, this is a lot of information, and, you know, maybe you want to like kind of know a little bit more about where affordable housing is in this community. There is an affordable housing resource list that's updated quarterly and posted on the Housing Access for Washtenaw County, or HAWC, website under Get Help. And I want to say it's like 20-page list of places that are both subsidized and also just landlords that have properties that are kind of more affordable in price. And so if you are looking to help a participant in a program that you're working on or whatnot, this is actually a good list that it is updated. The last time it was updated was in June. So we're nearing another update of that list, but generally it will tell you a little bit about like the rental rates that are in the community in that different development, and whether or not the property accepts vouchers, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the landscape, I will say, and then kind of diving a little bit deeper into kind of homelessness and folks experiencing housing insecurity. I will share with you that because of limited housing resources, right? I talked about that 25% of, you know, households ever receive any type of subsidized assistance for that are low income and need that housing assistance. Because there are such limited resources, HUD really dedicates some of those resources to serve people with the most acute housing needs, i.e. homeless households. And so there's a lot of nuance to what that means, who qualifies as homeless, et cetera, et cetera. But there are essentially 4 definitions or 4 categories of homeless that HUD has approved, and for which it's different funding streams, you know, have to follow. The biggest one is category 1, meaning someone is literally homeless on the streets, in an emergency shelter, or maybe exiting an institution that they've been in for less than 90 days and previously they were on the streets or in a shelter. There are 3 other definitions. Category 2 is around folks who are at imminent risk of becoming homeless. Category 3 is households that are meeting the definition of homeless under other federal statutes, like youth who are doubled up and considered homeless under the Department of Education. And then category 4 is for those who are fleeing domestic violence situations. In the different HUD programs that are administered locally in our community, they depend on which category of homelessness that you are qualifying under. So it really just depends. And oftentimes people get frustrated because they're not eligible for some type of assistance, even though they are very much, you know, housing insecure. But locally, we have about a little less than 300 households that are experiencing homelessness, literal homelessness, that category 1 homelessness at any given point in time. The gray bar here shows those who are unsheltered. We've had a significant drop in the number of unsheltered households over the past many years, although I do think this year it's climbing again. Which is unfortunate, but the blue is those who are in an emergency shelter or a homeless transitional housing program. I will just say briefly here that homelessness in Washtenaw County disproportionately affects people who identify as Black or African American. 61% of our population served identifies as Black, whereas 12 or 13%, depending on the year, of the general population. And then those who are identifying as white are about 36% of the homeless population, whereas 74% of the general population. This is due to a number of factors, including systemic racism, especially in the housing and housing policy world, especially the federal government over the past 70, 80 years, and also a number of other factors as well. There's approximately 5,000 people a year experiencing homelessness, and about 2,800 to 3,300 people that are experiencing that category 1 homeless definition that I talked about previously. And, one of the most significant reasons that people are homeless is just simply the lack of affordable housing, that 25% of people eligible for assistance ever receives it, that we just don't have enough units in place to really, help and fill that gap and fill that need. I'll just briefly share with you the definition that we use of like, what does ending homelessness mean? And then that implies sort of how we structure the homeless system of care and who gets what resources. So really, it's that we are having a system in place where homelessness is rare, brief, and a one-time experience, and that we have the capacity to quickly identify and engage people at risk of or experiencing homelessness, that we prevent people from losing their housing and divert them from shelter whenever possible, that we provide people with immediate access to shelter and crisis services without barriers to entry, and that we quickly connect people to permanent housing and related services. I will say in our community, we are really not able to meet any of those criteria right now. This is what our system of care is set up to do. We have a coordinated entry, which I'll talk about in just a second. We use a common assessment tool to assess where people are, what their needs are, how quickly we can get them housed, and what the barriers might be to being able to house them. We have essentially what we call a by name list of all homeless households, and every other week we are meeting as what's called the Community Housing Prioritization Committee to make housing referrals and placement for homeless dedicated housing resources. So housing access for Washtenaw County is our coordinated entry. This is a call center number 734-961-1999. Many of you probably have heard of before. HAWK also has a website, housingaccess.net, and it's a partnership between right now 2 agencies. It is going, it's kind of in flux right now and going through transition. And so this will look, this process might look a little bit differently in the near future. But for now, essentially, HAWK is triaging households and determining if they're housed, what resources they might need to be able to stay housed. That is typically just information and referral. If they're at imminent risk, which means they will lose their primary residence within 14 days, they may be eligible for eviction prevention or diversion services. And then if they're category 1, homeless, living in a place not meant for human habitation, etc., then they may be eligible for these homeless dedicated resources. I know that some folks you may be assisting over time are not in Washtenaw County. And so I just wanted to share with you all, the state has termed what we term locally as HAWK as a housing assessment and resource agency, or HARA. And so the state has on their website a list of contacts for each community. You probably can't tell right down here, but this is the actual HARA contact list, and it's by county. It includes kind of intake hours, intake days, the address where the agency is located, as well as kind of email or a website to find. And so if you're looking for someone, trying to help them in Monroe or Livingston or Lenawee, Wayne, that is a resource that you can use to quickly kind of identify the HAWK-like entity in another community. So when I was talking about kind of making homelessness rare, brief, and one time, one of that is just to prevent evictions, prevent someone from falling into the homeless system of care. And so their landlords file nearly 200,000 eviction cases each year in Michigan, and around 40,000 Michigan households lose their homes as a result of court-ordered evictions every year. There are eviction prevention programs that, especially during kind of the COVID response over the last 2.5 years, we've had additional resources to prevent eviction. We've also had a federal moratorium on evictions that's no longer in place. But these were ways in which we could prevent evictions from happening, stop them, and help people with financial resources to stay in place. Those are diminishing, going away very quickly. And so we are left with the resources that we've typically had to prevent eviction, which are not much, but we do have some. The county.
Amanda,
Yes.
and I think we should say that the things that we had during the pandemic were referred to as Sarah. So if you heard of
Yes.
Sarah, that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, the Sarah program, and that is officially ending as of September 30th. So what we typically will have in place, again, like after September 30th, is we use what's called ESG grants, Michigan, or they're HUD federal grants that are provided then to the state, and the state contracts with the county. They're called emergency solutions grants funding, and we use that to prevent evictions. I just wanted to point out that typically a household has to first apply for the Michigan State Emergency Relief prior to obtaining ESG assistance. The caveat is there is a waiver process to basically say, I know that I'm not going to be eligible for SER, or I'm not going to be able to get SER in time. And so there is a waiver process, but generally the process, an agency like Hawk will tell you is that you have to apply for SER, come back, and then tell us what you may have received with SER to get additional prevention resources. And I wanted to just share, Michigan Legal Help is a really great resource. It's an online resource that the folks at Legal Services of South Central Michigan and their partners have created. And there's a whole portion of it just specifically around housing and understanding the eviction process, the reasons for eviction. These are just snapshots on your screen from that website of the different reasons that somebody might be evicted, and then some of the requirements that a landlord must go through in order to legally go through the eviction process with the tenant. And that includes notifying the tenant typically that, this is happening, giving them time to remedy the situation, find the resources to pay the back rent, et cetera, or move. And so I think I'm not totally skilled at being able to share with you all the different phases of the eviction process, but I did think as like a follow-up to this, if you all were interested, we could put something together of a training that's more specific to some of these different aspects like eviction process that you might be interested in. The other kind of thing that you'll often hear if someone calls Hawk is, do you have anywhere else to go? And so we know that a large portion of people that are entering the homeless system haven't come directly from being evicted. They often get evicted and then they couch surf with family or friends, or are doubled up is another term, where they're staying with family and friends. And then they've really, extended all resources, extended all opportunities to stay with that family and friend. And then the family and friend is saying, all right, you got to get out. And so that's when they kind of enter the shelter system. And so we have a small pilot program that's going on over the last 2 years to divert clients. And it's had really great success, which you can see here. But it's just one way in which Hawk, as well as the Shelter Association of Washtenaw County, which has our largest individual shelter, is trying to divert households with just some flexible resources like a food card that they can bring back to that household that they were staying with and say, I'll help pay for groceries, or a gas card and say, here's some gas money that I can contribute to the household right now if you allow me to stay here. So they're really trying to do some mediation and financial assistance in order to keep people out of the shelter system. And that's primarily because we don't have immediate access to shelter. The shelter wait list is typically 4 to 6 weeks long for individuals. And it really just depends on families. So it's not exactly emergency shelter if folks are in an emergency or a crisis and can't get access to that resource. So, once, eviction prevention doesn't work or diversion doesn't work, here's kind of just the continuum of temporary housing and services, and then to permanent housing and services, and the agencies that are doing this work. And this is just a chart that I thought would be helpful so you all understand kind of how the homeless system of care is operating, who's involved, and what kind of population specifics that they're working with. Let me just see where we are with time. Okay, I want to leave some time for questions. So I will just quickly say we're really close to the end. So we are a housing first system of care. And so we really prioritize providing permanent housing to people experiencing homelessness before trying to address other critical life issues like getting a job, budgeting properly, getting substance use treatment if they want. So there's really no preconditions that should be in place for someone accessing emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing. We really believe that housed people are not homeless. And that is the priority in getting someone housed. And so our system of care is really trying to meet the needs, the physiological needs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for people, and then being able to help someone with other aspects that they might be interested in pursuing in their lives. So with that said, we have this housing prioritization process, resources for kind of homeless dedicated resources, like all housing resources, are very limited. And so we use this process whereby clients are contacting HAWK. They're trying to divert folks. You would get an assessment if you're literally homeless. And then you're placed on a list that a body of social service and coordinating agencies meets or every other week to review that list and talk about client barriers to finding housing, what resources might be available. If not a dedicated housing resource, are they on a housing choice voucher waiting list? Are they able to be in a roommate situation with somebody that they're staying with in the shelter, or all sorts of kind of creative ways to think about helping someone get out of their homeless situation and back into housing as quickly as possible. At the CHIP meetings, clients are prioritized based on their vulnerability and barriers. And we are really looking for housing those with the most acute needs first. So there's a specific criteria that's being looked at depending on the type of resource that's available, be it permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. Those are two different types. Rapid rehousing is a short or medium term assistance with services where someone is renting in the private landlord setting and expected to then take on the rent once the services and the rental assistance goes away. And then supportive housing is the long-term affordable housing that's provided along with long-term supportive services. And supportive housing is typically really only prioritized for people experiencing chronic homelessness, which is about 20% of our overall literal homeless population. Chronic homelessness has a very specific definition per HUD and their love of specificity in terms of definitions. But generally, chronic homelessness is long-term homelessness on the streets or in shelter coupled with a disabling condition, and no other kind of resources in order to get housed and stay housed. So once a referral for housing is made, providers assist their clients or future tenants with identifying a successful housing unit, or if it's a site-based, project-based site, they will go and look at that site and talk to that, with that client about that opportunity. If the client successfully moves into that unit, then they're removed from the CHIP list. Alternatively, if someone is no longer in contact after 60 days, someone may be removed from the CHIP list. We often really try not to do that, but sometimes for whatever circumstances, some people move away from the county or, resolve their own homeless situation. And so we remove them from the list. And then this is my last slide. So that was 40 slides quickly, I'll say. But I think it's really important just to know that we have some site-based, project-based housing, but we have a number, I think it's over 2,600 vouchers that are in our county between MISHDA, Michigan State Housing and Development Authority, and Ann Arbor Housing Commission implementing those vouchers. And so private landlords are really critical partners in the work. And so Washtenaw County's rental vacancy rate, I was looking at, I think it was 2005 data, it was 12%. So that means 12% of rentals were vacant at any point in time. And in 2019, the rental vacancy rate went down to 3%, which is where we believe it is right now. And so that just means there's very little opportunity for movement and for people, if they do become evicted, to then find new housing. And so we have a coordinated group called the Housing Coordinators Network that is made up of agency leads that are doing kind of housing location or landlord engagement work. They meet monthly just to talk about how to entice more landlords to take folks with difficult, challenges like economic hardship, eviction histories, low rent, no income right now, criminal backgrounds, all sorts of things. And they meet regularly to discuss kind of which landlords are working with different agencies, what are some ways in which we can incentivize landlords to house someone, and they're really collaborative. So it's like one person getting housing is a win for the entire system of care, all of the agencies, not just the agency that that particular client is working with. So we try to embody that in the Housing Coordinators Network and sharing landlord lists and resources. Sharon Lapidus is our community housing locator at the WHA who administers the Housing Coordinators Network. And I forgot to put her contact in the slides, but we are on the county's server. And so you could quickly find Sharon, just Sharon L. But I think it's her last name, Lapidess, at washtenaw.org is her email, but I can also put that in the chat for you. So she's kind of organizing that group. And if there are any of you that are interested in kind of really, honing in on this work around landlords, it would be a good opportunity even just to get on the email lists where you can hear about kind of vacancies and stuff. Okay, so I'll stop sharing and just see, I know there were a couple of folks in the chat box. Our refugee population, so I'll answer these, and then if you have any other questions, are refugee populations eligible for these housing options? I will say it depends. We have gotten clarity from HUD that refugees are eligible for rapid rehousing. And so we do know that families can go through that process, and we've actually been working with JFS specifically to try to help refugee families to get connected with families rapid rehousing. Okay, Ruth just shared the McKinney-Vento Act is what schools use to treat students as homeless, but that includes many doubled up families. It's less stringent definition than what HUD uses, and that's correct. Teddy said, just started reading Evicted book. It's a tough read. It is a tough read. I do encourage folks to read it. You get a sense of all the trauma that's associated with being evicted, and also just kind of all of the barriers that people are up against when going through the eviction process, and also kind of what the landlord's experiences as well. It follows a number of different families in the Milwaukee area, and it's by Matthew Desmond, who on the national stage has a lot of data around evictions now and has this whole eviction lab where you can learn more information about evictions that are occurring. Okay, so, and then Teddy wrote, last year I read about a study on a program that provided people being evicted with lawyers, which dramatically decreased the number of evictions. And yes, so that may be called right to counsel. So right to counsel is something where we are giving legal representation to people who are in eviction court. Right now, that is happening in all Washtenaw County courts. Both Hawk and legal services are at eviction court, and somebody who maybe doesn't have connection to legal assistance, they can be connected to legal assistance while they're at court. Court is still over Zoom, and they can kind of connect, the judge and the judge's team can connect somebody who's the defendant owing money or whatnot with a legal services representative. They can kind of step offline into a Zoom breakout room and discuss their case and get some assistance that way. We would like to see that continue, but it is a resource issue that we are up against. And yes, it is free legal help for right now. And that was part of the CIRA program that was put in place, is a requirement that courts were connecting with legal services and housing resources.
So, so Amanda, imagine that we're working with a client who is housed but has an eviction notice and maybe is connected with legal services, but it's unclear if that is going to be successful. A lot of times I know legal services is able to delay eviction by a few months rather than actually stop the eviction completely. What could we do to help a family with a lower amount of income find new housing in our county? Do you have suggestions?
Yeah, so I think that's often what happens. Legal services staff does say, like, we can prevent it from happening for a time, but not ultimately. And so slowing down the process is really helpful, because then you can try to help identify another unit that the household might be in before the eviction is on their record, which then might prevent them from really obtaining new housing. So I would say a couple of things. One is to, as best as you can, understand where they are in the eviction process, how much time that they have. I think it's really confusing for tenants who are in crisis. And I've watched eviction court a lot lately, and it's just clear how confusing it is for someone to understand where they are in the process, what their rights are, and whatnot. But one would be to quickly think about looking at that HAWK resource list or other kind of more affordable places, and to start thinking about how would they apply for new housing. Sometimes application fees can be, a detriment or a deterrent from being able to apply for somewhere else. So are there resources where they can, tap into barrier busters funds or whatnot for application fees? The other would be thinking about, applying for HAWK assistance. It's not immediate. There is this transition in place where HAWK is going to generally take some time, but there is currently an email that you can email HAWK. It's on the HAWK website. If you scroll to the bottom, you can try to find out general eligibility, for example, the Emergency Solutions Grant, ESG prevention funds, and think about if that's an option, and then help your client, one, apply for the state SER, the state emergency relief, and then two, try to continue to operate through the HAWK process and get that prevention appointment. I'm not sure how far out the prevention appointments are right now, but SOS Community Services has taken on the prevention appointment piece. So we are hopeful that as part of HAWK, SOS is doing this kind of part of the system, and hoping that we'll kind of more quickly be able to get through prevention assessments to see where people are, how much they owe, and what assistance might be available to folks.
Any other questions? People want to raise their hands? Amanda, since nobody else is raising their hand right now, let me just ask you, sometimes we have people who are housed, but they're living in very poor housing conditions. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes. So that has definitely been the case, and we've partnered with the health department on some particular cases. I know over the times the OCED has, and others. If someone is living in kind of a rental unit where the conditions are very poor, they have a couple of avenues, but I would say one is getting in touch with legal services to make them aware of what's going on and see what their rights are. Sometimes you can withhold rent and put it in an escrow account while you are looking and trying to get repairs from the landlord. And so legal services can walk a client through that process, but know that that is an option, but they must put it in an escrow account. You can't just stop paying rent completely. You will have to ultimately go back and pay, but that is a way to get the attention of the landlord and get them to make repairs. Another is that the Fair Housing Center of South Central and Mid Michigan, I can never remember the full name, but Fair Housing Center is another one to contact if there are concerns around repairs not being made because of, some discrimination that's being made as part of the household, or kind of, a pattern of activity there that's not doesn't seem legal. So that would be, I think, two resources on kind of like the housing end to get in touch with those two different agencies for some advice. Again, there's also Michigan Legal Help has, I think, a whole page, if I remember correctly. I know I've looked at it over time, related to that and how to notify your landlord that you're withholding rent and all sorts of stuff. So that is a possibility as well. And then I know that there's been some cases where people's property has just been declared uninhabitable. And so sometimes then that triggers that you are then category 1 and eligible for homeless assistance if you're living in an uninhabitable place. And so you would also be able and want to call Hawk to see if you can get, housing resources that way.
Thank you, Amanda. I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one. Otherwise, we'll just give you a round of applause. Anybody else? All right, well then I will get the slide.